Hello and welcome to the APMG International Australasia Wednesday webinar. My name is Mark Croxford and I'm APMG's Business Development Manager for the Australasia region. Today's recording is a retake of the P3M3 Assessment Choices webinar, originally held on Wednesday the 18th of September. Due to a technical difficulty, we are re-recording this session for your benefit. So today's webinar, P3M3 Assessment Choices, Registered Consultant, Led or Self-Assessment, which one is right for your organisation and when? Our presenters today are Laurie, Kirk and Warren Jolly. Today's webinar looks at the use of P3M3 or Portfolio Program and Project Management Maturity Model, and we'll also touch on the use of APMG Maturity Index. Maturity Model Assessment allows an organisation, be it government, corporate or private, whether they be large, small or indeed anything in between, to have its methods and processes assessed according to management best practice against a clear set of external benchmark assessments. Of note, the Australian Government introduced the ICT Reform Agency Capability Initiative to improve agencies' capability to commission, manage and realise benefits from ICT-enabled investments. Since September 2012, agencies have been required to complete annual assessments of their portfolio, program and project management capability and report to the Australian Government Secretary's ICT Governance Board by the beginning of October each year. I'm advised Australian government agencies have the option of conducting a self-assessment or engaging an APMG International P3M3 accredited consulting organisation depending on particular circumstances. And very shortly, Laurie and Warren will take you through this topic, P3M3 Assessment Choices, Registered Consultant, Led or Self-Assessment, which one is right for your organisation and when, in some detail. But before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. You will all have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the webinar using the question window on your GoToWebinar control panel. However, we will hold off getting Laurie and Warren to answer those questions until the end of the presentation. Then I will ask Laurie and Warren the questions on your behalf. I've set aside about 15 minutes to answer those questions and we'll do our best to get through as many of those questions as we can in the time available. Today's webinar will be recorded, and in a few days' time, everyone who is registered for this webinar will receive an email link containing the recording so you can revisit any aspect of the webinar or indeed share the webinar with colleagues. Now, before I introduce you to Warren and Laurie, I'd like to give you some background on APMG International. APMG International is a leading examination institute which accredits training and consulting organisations and manages certification schemes for professionals. And we have a deep commitment to make leading practice available to everyone. With a global headquarters in the United Kingdom, we have 12 international offices covering Europe, the Americas, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, China and Hong Kong, South Africa and Australasia. APMG International's extensive suite of professional development products amount to more than 80 world-class qualifications, and our publications, courseware and methodologies are translated in up to 23 languages. Through a network of over 350 accredited training and consulting organisations, more than 1,800 specialist trainers and expert consultants provide advice and counsel and deliver training and consulting services around the products, methods and tools that improve the capability of organisations and individuals who apply them. And each month on average, more than 18,000 exams are taken for APMG International certifications. Ladies and gentlemen, today's webinar, P3M3 Assessment Choices, Registered Consultant, Led or Self-Assessment, which one is right for your organisation and when, is presented by Laurie, Kirk of UXC Consulting and Warren Jolly of Kinetic Australia. UXC Consulting is an APMG International accredited training and consulting organisation, and Laurie Kirk is both a registered consultant in project portfolio management and Prince 2 and an approved trainer. And he will soon add the program and project sponsorship or PPS certification to his training offering. UXC is part of UXC Limited, the largest Australian-owned provider of ICT consulting services. Warren Jolly is the Land Portfolio Lead at Kinetic Australia. He has strong experience in team leadership, project management, military capability development and safety system management. In a former life, when studying for his Executive Masters of Business, Complex Project Management, Warren gained first-hand experience in the practical application of the P3M3 self-assessment tool. Kinetic Australia is part of Kinetic, a leading international defence and security technology company. Kinetic is not yet an APMG International accredited consulting organisation, but I am working on them. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I present to you the first of your two webinar presenters today, Mr. Laurie Kirk, and I will change presenter now to Laurie. And Laurie, you are now unmuted.
Thank you very much, Mark, and welcome everybody to this webinar. When Mark actually raised the issue of maybe putting on a webinar, I was very keen to point out and outline a number of aspects that we do as we go through the P3M3 assessment. I was also very keen to involve my colleague Warren because I think he also gives an interesting perspective on the role of self-assessment and also a nice introduction to complexity. In 6 or 7 slides, what I'm going to do is I thought it was important to outline typical approaches that are used in a registered consultant-led assessment. That way we're comparing apples with apples. I think there are advantages to clients all the way through, but under no way am I sort of indicating that self-assessment is not appropriate. In fact, self-assessment certainly has a place that I'm going to outline. The first one is when you look through the approaches that we have is the first step is really the proposal request from the client. And the client, the first thing is the client gets an offer and decides whether they want APMG certification. This is an additional sort of additional quality assurance step that can be undertaken, where whilst the assessment has been undertaken by a registered consultant and by an accredited consulting organisation, some organisations' quality management system asks that they have independent verification. Now APMG are able to provide that as well, and that means APMG at certain times during the assessment will review how the assessor is doing, how is performing, will sit in on a number of interviews, and at the end provide certification and assurance to the client. Before that, as we're actually responding back to the client, registered consultants are able to use APM guidance, which gives consistent numbers of programs, projects, and they're provided as groupings. And that's very important for procurement because we have a number of clients originally a couple of years ago who would say, we just need a P3M3 assessment. So after a number of iterations, we'd finally find out how many projects, how many programs they're running, and then we'd be able to quote. What we're doing is that by providing mandatory roles and minimum numbers, the client is assured that they're going to have a consistent approach to an assessment. And like the Australian government has whilst they're mandated it, because they've used an accepted methodology that has consistent standards, they can provide between, the client can choose between different providers as they go through their annual assessments. It also allows backward compatibility for your previous assessments. It also allows an ACO to select registered consultants with suitable skills. I think it's interesting to note that there are, the latest count, there are 51 registered program and project management consultants in the world. A majority of those are P3M3 assessors. And in Australia, we have 31 registered PPM consultants. Now, our company has 7 of those, and each of those 7 has a unique set of skills. We have registered consultants who have done P3M3 assessments that are experts in diploma and advanced diploma. They're trainers, so they actually are very familiar with the work of the PMBOK, the Project Management Body of Knowledge. I have other trainer assessors who's a change management trainer. I have another person who's an ITIL expert and another person who is a portfolio expert. So once again, when you're looking at a registered consultant, you're able to select the registered consultant with suitable skills. So these are some of the advantages, even when we're looking at just working through that brief of when we're going for a proposal. These are some of the advantages that you as a client will get. It also ensures that you have senior management involvement by making sure that when you are going through the procurement process, you are able to get senior management involvement to say, well, what skills, what kind of registered consultant do we want to lead our assignment? Approaches used in RegCon, first of all, as a registered consultant, we would assess the organisation. Now, what does that mean? We make sure the context for the assessment, why is the client doing it, and also have a good look at the existing process and documentation review. And that gives us a very good idea of the environment that the client is working with. Is it one of substantial change, or is it one of embedment? Are they just sustaining what they're doing, or are they wanting to act? Where are they in their capability improvement? A key aspect of this is creating an assessment sponsoring group. Now, these are things that you may still do in self-assessment, but I'm not sure that you'll get the independent rigour that you will get from a registered consultant. One of the key points is that last point, staff briefings, and in all the assignments that I've done, I've always made sure that there's at least one, if not repeated 2 or 3 times, 50-minute briefings to staff. And most of these staff may not be interviewed. In fact, we've also used it as a way of increasing awareness that the organisation is assessing its maturity. Quite often staff will come up to us at the end of the presentation and provide some anecdotal evidence, or in some cases be included in the interview process. What will we do for the client? By going through this assessment stage, we ensure that the questions in the interviews are appropriate, that the briefings improve awareness of what is organisation maturity, and the sponsoring group provides a basis for overseeing the implementation of the recommendations. Having that sponsoring group at this early stage in the assessments gives me a lot of confidence that we'll have someone who will undertake the ownership and the completion of the capability improvement. Let's look at the interviews, and this is probably where the biggest difference is between a self-assessment and a registered consultant-led assessment. And the 3 diagrams that I've put there are quite important on this slide. The first one on the bottom right is, for those who are not familiar with P3M3, we could look at up to 3 submodels at portfolio, MAC program, and project management. Within each of these, we'll look at 7 perspectives, and they're outlined underneath those. But underneath those, and I like to think that their foundation, are non-process attributes that we look at, such as roles, experience, information, scrutiny, capability development, planning and estimating. And if we get those right as a foundation, I often find that when we're looking at the maturity of those, we get an insight into the culture of the organisation, because I believe they support the processes that are sitting above in that diagram. The second point, the project model. Now, there are freely available project model, portfolio model and program model. And even if you're doing a self-assessment, I'd urge you to certainly look at these and make sure that each one of these you are familiar with, because they provide detailed attributes. They have detailed attributes that you can walk through and determine, are you at that level of maturity. When we're undertaking interviews as a registered consultant, we make sure that they are always one-on-one. We do not do group interviews, and we do that to actually preserve the anonymity. I think that's a really important point, that we can guarantee to our clients that at no point in time any comment will be attributed. It's always confidential, and we may use 1 or even 2 consultants in an assignment. Now, sometimes on large assignments we'll certainly have another consultant there to make sure, if you started to do 25 or 28 interviews, I can assure you each one of those interviews are between an hour and an hour and a quarter, up to an hour and a half. You certainly have a lot of data that you need to collate, and having a colleague when you're doing a large or a complex organisation can assist you. That guidance by the published models. Every time we're using the assessment, I use the published models, and I find that they give me great satisfaction during the interview, and they also give the interviewee some guidance and something to take away and to check their progress throughout the year. So to the client, we make sure that you do have that confidentiality. We do make sure that we guide people that there are publicly accessible references. But what we do is we make sure that people in a registered consultant assessment can really have that opportunity at least once a year to share their thoughts. impacts on the organisation. Fourth step is when we validate the assessment. And I put two images up there that I've just finished an assessment today, as a matter of fact, and I said to Mark, a lot of thinking happens, and a lot of thinking where you're asking yourself, are we going in the right direction? Have we actually assessed accurately? Do the median scores of the observations and the detailed qualitative data that we have, does that really support the scores? Does the evidence support the scores? And what we do is we do have APMG provides us with a consistent assessment tool that we use, and do these scores relate to the actual performance, and can we create a holistic view? You may not get that in a self-assessment. You also find that not only independence, but we draw on other experience of the assessors. I've just finished 17 of these assessments, and I often find myself referring to similar organisations, respecting the confidentiality, but trying to offer the client alternative solutions, alternative observations, alternative recommendations that I've been able to see in similar sized organisations. And I don't believe you'll get that from self-assessment. Interesting, on some of my scores, I have found that some of the scores are actually, when I get people who have done self-assessment, I had one client recently where probably half of the people used self-assessment as preparation coming into an interview. The quality of the interview was outstanding because people were already understanding of the process. In most of those cases, people were underestimating their achievement. We'd often think that people would gild the lily or rank too high. I found the opposite is actually a factor. So I believe that it can highlight trends that people were not apparent. A couple more slides. I'm looking at how we report the observations and how do we put together a package for the client. And these are some of the questions that we continue to ask ourselves, and in most of our assignments we also have peer review in the company. Are the observations accurate? Are the recommendations practical? Can the levels that we suggest be substantiated? Has anonymity been maintained? Now for the client, this assessment report we provide should be used as a reference throughout the year for capability improvement plan. And those observations must lead into practical recommendations without bias, and they're able to baseline trends. And I'm not sure that a self-assessment can do all of those things. I'm not sure that a self-assessment in your organisation cannot be provided in bias. And often, even as with this organisation I've completed today, I didn't review the previous engagement or assessment until I had actually locked down my particular scores. The final presentation, I think that's also, you're asking yourself what is the key or keys to success for the organisation. And we often do a presentation both to the sponsoring group, executive, interviewees, but we also relate and recommendations to the current capability improvement plan without bias. Now to you as a client, this reinforces that independence of advice. There are many times where I've actually provided advice to clients that probably wasn't what they expected. So I'm suggesting that we can once again ensure that there is a clear link shown between their portfolio approach, program, if they're operating programs, and project recommendations. The other thing that's offered from a registered consultant approach is the follow-on advice, and that's a very real question that I have been asked on more than one occasion. But how am I able to know whether a large project is over or under investing in one or more of the perspectives? And that hot link for those people who'd like to use those slide pack goes to the APMG Maturity Index. Now that is only available to ACOs and Reg Cons. It answers these questions, and it undertakes what it is. It's based on a typical project assessment, but there are additional questions, and these questions are fed into an international database, once again completely confidential. So the report that comes out of that allows the consultant to cross-check, and the client can say, well, on a similar project of similar size and similar complexity, this is what you should be, the level you should be investing in those 7 perspectives. I think this is where we're going to see a lot of growth in the market, where I've got mature clients that are now wanting to know, are we still over or under investing on that specific large project? In summary, they're my summary points. I think the key thing is that we have a number of people who say there's one school of thought that can say quantitatively, the numbers, the number of interviews. we can do a quantitative analysis. But I'd like to suggest to you that when you've talked to 28 people for an hour or hour and a half, what you find from there is that you get a massive amount of qualitative data. I think the confidentiality and the independence advice and the ability for us to continue to provide that link with the client, such as the APMG Maturity Index, is very important. I just wanted to walk through with you, Mark, and I hope that sort of gives a summary of the kind of approach that a registered consultant undertakes.
Thank you very much, Laurie. You know, that's very good indeed. Now, what I'm going to do is unmute Warren and prepare to hand over to Warren to make him the presenter.
Looks like we're good to go. Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks very much for your piece, Laurie. And I'd just like to welcome all the listeners and thank them very much for taking up the time out of their no doubt busy lives to listen to all of us talking about P3M3 assessment, RegCon or self-assessment, and what's right for you. The way I'm going to put forward the self-assessment piece is basically from my own experience in using self-assessment, and it's going to be really giving you an example on how self-assessment can be used, how it was used in my case, and hopefully that will stimulate thought for some ways in which you may be able to use it yourselves, either independently within an organisation or indeed to complement what might be done by RegCon. So I'm going to quickly take you through the areas there on the proposal, why I actually did some self-assessment, the context of it, how the interviews and the validation, the observations and report, and my final presentation. So a little bit of a case study to give you an example on just how it worked in my case. So here we go. Well, maybe it would if I could actually get the next slide. There we go. Now, the proposal, indeed, the work was done as a part of some academic work that I was doing in part of the course on an exec masters in complex project management. And it was about conducting the assessment at the current level of program maturity of an organisation, report on what I'd found, and essentially provide an outline capability implementation plan to increase the level of maturity of the program, but along the lines of taking the organisation from what was a number of projects and actually sort of develop the overarching organisation, developing a program management office in order to start to really utilise and liberate some of those the efficiencies that an organisation gets from actually having a PMO running a number of related projects. So essentially it was about gathering the information to provide evidence to support a business case that the senior executive in this case wanted for the development of a PMO. So really providing that basis for a business case that avoided the Rolls-Royce solution, because that's what they'd had. They'd already had a report done for them by an external service provider, and basically it was rejected, saying, "Oh, this is the Rolls-Royce solution. You're gilding the lily," to borrow one of Laurie's earlier phrases, and we're not into that. So you need to provide me some more evidence that this will be useful. So that was how my self-assessment was how it was used and what the proposal was. A lot of it was about educating the client. I thought, okay, I need something that's structured, that's credible, and that is repeatable, and that's why I actually went towards the P3M3 assessment. But a little bit more on that later. The context that I wanted to put it in actually came from a report by an article and sort of some research really from Hayward, Sponge and Turnbull in the McKinsey Quarterly of 2007, number 2, that spoke about the two different types of complexity, or the two different types of complexity that they actually proposed existed within an organisation. Firstly, there was the institutional complexity. You get a number of nodes and interactions that, of course, you get in a large organisation that actually has a number of interactions in it, of course. It stems from the strategic choices that organisation makes, and what the external interaction is and what the context is of those. And it actually grows, of course, as it would, adding a number of units or increasing the diversity of those interactions. The other type of complexity that was defined in this article was that of individual complexity. That is the way in which employees and managers experience and deal with it. And essentially, I think we've all heard this phrase a lot, it's how hard it is to actually get things done around here. So there's two different types. Now, cracking that code, as the article was about, is that basically they're putting forward that if you focus on managing complexity, is actually to be targeting that institutional complexity, i.e. reducing the number of interactions and nodes, and you can actually destroy the value. The value in a lot of cases is created by that number of nodes, the number of interactions, actually sort of what's going on. So if you're going to focus on it by changing the way the organisation is organised, then you can potentially destroy its value. What they were putting forward is actually better to focus on identifying, reducing that degree of individual complexity by making detailed organisational and operating model choices essentially in those areas. And it's in those three areas that I saw that the P3M3 model, and it's used to assess the organisation, really came home. And I think you can draw a lot of parallels in that, clarifying of roles, refining key processes, and developing appropriate skills and capabilities between those areas, between those three and the areas of assessment within the P3M3 model. So what it was about was actually addressing individual complexity, which actually creates the room, the headspace, to increase that institutional complexity, and thus gives you the capacity to not only manage the challenges you have within the organisation, but also to seek value in the new strategic challenges. And I like that approach. That resonated with me. I could tie in that approach with what the P3M3 assessment model can do for an organisation, and actually addressing that individual complexity, which feeds into that institutional complexity. Now, this is the model that I've put together to address this, and I'm going to say out front here that certainly a big part of putting this together and getting this all together in my head, because it was not a model that I'd used before, was actually done with the assistance of Laurie, Kirk. Kirk and I have known each other for some time, and we sat down and said, okay, how do we crack this? What's a way to put this together? And certainly from a self-assessment point of view, one of the points I would really strongly emphasise is that you do need some background, and I'd say some mentoring in using it if you haven't done it before. And certainly it's something that if you have a registered consultant doing some work, you could talk to them about how you apply it within an organisation and how that self-assessment's done. And as you've heard, Laurie has spoken about the people in the organisations where he's done work actually using the model. So absolutely a prerequisite. But if you have a look there on the steps there, how I was going to approach in this organisation is putting in those research methodologies, and there was some mixed methodologies there, not only the P3M3 assessment model. There was a bit of a document review, a bit of observation, and sort of looking at what people were doing in sort of meetings, meeting minutes, things like that. So getting that under control, looking at that, reviewing those findings, and actually looking at, okay, that operating model, and starting to talk to people about an operating model and its what its purpose is there of a PMO, clarifying roles and responsibilities, refining those processes. A lot of people, when I spoke about a PMO, they thought, oh, just another layer of bureaucracy, just another mailbox, just adding more stress to my life, not adding any values. There's a lot of talk about what a PMO can bring, and actually there in order to sort of guide how the self-assessment model can be used to reduce that level of individual complexity by putting that model in, clarifying those roles and responsibilities, putting people into the right skill sets, and increasing the whole system and process level integration to get that. So that's when you're addressing the individual complexity and the institutional complexity. You get an increase in your capacity to actually do what an organisation is supposed to do and actually grow and actually add value. So that's how I saw the model tying in to addressing complexity. People get a lot of talk about complexity, but well, what is it and how do we address it? Then through that, step 5, review and learn Okay, the sort of assessment piece, and you get that whole learning loop piece, that you can go through those steps again and again. And we'll see that can be as we go through this a little bit more, just how we can do that, both RegCon, certainly, absolutely, and perhaps supplement it along the way with some self-assessment. Okay, what did I do for interviews? Well, I was a bit of an outsider, so it wasn't the conventional self-assessment. I guess, and Laurie and I have discussed this and thought, well, yeah, you could have one large organisation, get someone in from another office, perhaps, something like that. But I certainly think an outside view is great. Adds a lot of the benefits of that independence that Laurie spoke about earlier. Certainly, you get someone inside the organisation. Certainly, every organisation is different, but I do think that extra eye, I think, is useful. Because it wasn't conventional, people were busy. I was seen as a bit of an academic coming in and doing this. There's no halt for workshops and discussions. As you see at the bottom, everyone's saying, "Oh, they're too busy, and we didn't want workshops and group work and things." So, started off with an introductory information sheet, which I think, as you can imagine, not too many people read. Some semi-structured interviews started off with, so a bit of an intro. Fortunately, whilst I was outside the organisation, everyone knew me. I'd worked with a lot of them before. A bit of a semi-structured, what's your story? So to open up people to storytelling, which of course everyone loves to do. Got a lot of information out of that and sort of guided that information along until we sort of got down to the actual, okay, let's go through the self-assessment now. Let's have a little bit of a talk. And got a lot of value out of those, of course, under sort of assured level of anonymity. Structured interviews, very useful, using the instrument at downloads, very powerful, and people had resonated with people very quickly as to where they were, so those descriptions are very, very powerful, used in that instrument. Bit of snowball sampling, it's interesting once people found out what I was doing. I had people approaching me going, Warren, can I talk to you about what's going on? Certainly. So very powerful in that interview approach. Validation, yeah, some multi-methodology. I was lucky to sort of be able to look at how what I'd actually found out determined from that self-assessment instrument certainly resonated with the other methodologies I was applying, and what I was actually finding out of the the minutes, previous consultant report, with registers, observing people. So it was good how we certainly got some that bit of a triangulation between the research sort of coming together. Now the observations in the report, cracking the complexity code. Let's just go back to the article that I mentioned earlier in those three main areas. A lot of the observations of the report came out to these areas, which the self-assessment directed me to. The lack of clarity, responsibilities, and accountabilities. Current program processes and systems insufficiently integrated. Weak capabilities in the area. Now, these were the things that were highlighted from the self-assessment. So I could certainly tie what was coming out of that to the overarching theme, which, because the area in which I was doing my study sort of resonated with complexity, which I think is very relevant. These are areas where you get where it can add complexity to the individual, so the individual complexity in an organisation, certainly in those areas. And I think we've seen them all before, and certainly they came out of the self-assessment tool. The final report, there's a lot of aha moments in that which were very powerful. After the initial response from the senior executive, which was a bit of a double take when he looked at the assessment, it started to resonate with him. I took him through the individual versus institutional complexity, and he went, "Oh, okay, that's good. I wouldn't have thought of it like that." But he said, "Now that you mentioned it, I'm very comfortable with how we addressed that." Certainly was able to bring out evidence to support that rating, and as he went through what those ratings meant, his initial kind of double take certainly went down completely. Thought, okay, yeah, you are. That's where we are. That's where we are. Certainly gave me the evidence to go, okay, you need to appoint a project manager to drive the formation of a PMO. You can't take people out of the organisation. You need someone to work to pull that together, and he certainly felt very comfortable in the amount of evidence that I gave him to do that. Internal stakeholder engagement, was able to certainly discuss that from what I'd drawn from use of the instrument in establishing that regularity, that battle rhythm, certainly getting the benefits realisation clear to what we were seeking, and certainly getting emphasising the need for a very systemic approach to risk assessment. Essentially, so using that tool, and it's the base for doing the self-assessment tool, what I got was feedback was this is much more useful than the Band-Aid that I was expecting. So I think that goes back to the assessment tool has been structured, it's been credible, and it's been repeatable, and certainly the industry recognised approach, which can actually be used as the basis for a wider body of work, and certainly was very useful in educating the client as to actually what I was doing. It really, this is it, and this is the approach. So I found that a very useful tool. From that final report, I was able to sort of prioritise, a number of actions there for them, both into immediate and sustained, and again, kind of back it up with what came out of the self-assessment. The report, that's what it looked like from a road ahead point of view. Well, it's not the whole report, of course, that was a key part of it, but you'll see there where I tied in those aspects from the McKinsey paper earlier on, contributors to individual complexity. Looking at those in the first column, through the P3M3 process perspectives that you can actually get from the self-assessment tool, where the organisation sat, what the target was, and those are immediate and sustained actions. So really, to a large degree, you had it all on one page. There was all the certainly all the evidence there within the report, and you was able to look and go, okay, there's some clarity there. So even in essence, just in that, I was able to sort of take away a little bit of his individual complexity and get it very, very clear as to what needed to be done. In conclusion, there's a whole bunch of things that what I would do differently is certainly get a bit of a feel for on-site initially. I think that individual complexity is quite elegant in the way in which it comes across, and there was a number of points that I thought came across certainly in using this instrument within an organisation where it can be used. Certainly as a basis for a business case, I found it very, very useful. Certainly you can combine it with other approaches, the P3M3 instrument, and certainly it can be used for a one-on-one briefing with a senior executive. Go, all right, let's have a look at the organisation. You've had the RegCon, come in and have a look. Let's just see what your feel is for the organisation, if they've been there for a short period of time, if they've been there for a longer period of time, just in order to bring it all together and give them something, and give them a quick assessment. Go, okay, this is where I think we need to go. Back to you, Mark.
Just coming off mute. Thank you very much there, Warren. That was very informative, and I appreciate you taking the time to share those experiences with me. Okay, I'm just going to make myself presenter again, because now it's time to ask Laurie and Warren some questions. I've already received a few questions. However, if you would like to ask either of these gentlemen a question, now is the time to type away in the question window of your webinar control panel. And just while we're waiting for additional questions, I'll take the opportunity to let you know about some upcoming APMG International Australasia events. On Wednesday, 2 October at midday Australian Eastern Standard Time, I will host a webinar on managing benefits, optimising return on investments, and will be joined by Steve Jenner, the Managing Benefits author and Chief Examiner, and a world-renowned expert in the portfolio and benefits management fields, and also Registered Consultant Phil Reid of Wired Consulting Australia. Steve will discuss how the managing benefits guidance can improve an organisation's ability to optimise benefits realisation, and Phil will discuss how to get started in defining benefits management practices within an organisation and the role independent assurance can play. And the other event, save the date, Friday the 15th of November. This year's APMG International Australasia Showcase will be held on Friday the 15th of November at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. The APMG International Showcase is the most interactive portfolio program and project management and service management event in the Australasia region, and provides the opportunity for you to identify, ask, and learn how you can better develop yourself professionally and position yourself to become a future leader in your profession. The links on the screen will take you to the showcase website. Okay, so we've had some questions come through, and the first question is from Paul, and it's addressed to Laurie. Laurie, these advantages, and I better take Laurie off mute first, otherwise he won't be able to answer the question. Laurie, these advantages are really at the heart of the value offered by an external consultant. Do you have clients that have actually continued on with the plan to make changes rather than just accumulating shelfware?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think something will become shelfware if the client doesn't see that the recommendations or observations are practical. And I think the best example, as any consultant has, when you've got a client that's undertaken a benefits workshop internally a week and a half after you deliver the report. And that has happened, and I find people are using what we do as observations and updates on the capability to start activities as early as 2 or 3 weeks out we finish. I also know that AGIMO and the Australian Government Information Office are also requiring agencies to outline their progress, and they go down to a specific level about target maturity at submodel level, but also what are you doing in each perspective. So the answer to the question is yes, the incentive is there. Even if that wasn't there, I believe that people have invested a lot of time in this, and you know, they are getting the value out of it. So I have seen lots of people use this as a reference.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. The second question comes from Mike. It's a little cryptic, but I'm sure you two gentlemen will understand. Did not Gershon say self-assessment?
I think I might answer that one, Warwick. I think what's Mike getting at is, yes, Gershon, the Gershon review did give agencies the ability to self-assess. And I think the word self-assess has got worked through, confused with self-assessment that's provided. That self-assess is that they can undertake a choice of either using an accredited consulting organisation or undertake their own ability to do it themselves. So I do think that there is now a very clear instruction that if they wish to go through a second pass business case, that the assessment has to be independently validated. However, what I believe is, whilst it's an annual assessment, we are getting a number of clients who are probably going to do self-assessment as a way of doing a mid-term or quarterly review of progress and do the independent assessment annually, or in some cases I've got a couple of clients that are going to do it every 2 years.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. The third question has come from Bradley. I think this is one right up Warren's alley. Can P3M3 help when managing complex projects?
Thanks very much for that, Mark. Yeah, absolutely it can, because I think it gives a lot of shape to actually what you're doing, and because you can tie in what P3M3 does, as I said, with not only with the complexity as it's defined there by Hayward, Spongin and Turnbull, actually that individual and institutional complexity, but also looking at from some other dimensions in whether you've got structural complexity, temporal complexity, technical complexity. You can actually you can start to sort of really break it down, break the problem down, which it is a bit paradoxical because, you know, complexity you need to sort of manage in a holistic kind of fashion, but to get some direction you've got to decompose it slightly, go, okay, this is where we are, that institutional complexity and what we're actually doing as an organisation, or what we're actually producing as an organisation, particularly if it's a certain piece of high technology equipment or capability. Yep, that's it. We've got to kind of learn to manage that. But the way we do that is actually manage complexity as an individual level. And I really strongly feel that the P3M3 assessment gives you a great way into that, a great insight into how you can do that by looking at those different areas of assessment and actually giving the organisation, giving the people within the organisation and giving the people that manage the organisation a road ahead as to how they address that quote there, how difficult it is to get things done around here, and actually getting the headspace and the room for people to actually address that that complexity that can actually really bring an organisation down. So absolutely, I think it does. I think it's a great tool for doing that, and it's certainly something that people can look at and go, okay, I get it now. I can do that, and certainly that's the response that I got from the senior executive I was briefing and in fact working for.
Okay, thanks, Warren. Laurie, I might give you the opportunity to expand on Warren's answer because during the presentation you referred to APMG Maturity Index and specifically the complexity aspects that it addresses.
Yeah, there are two aspects, and I'm glad that question was raised by Bradley, and that's probably one of the reasons of having Warren involved as well to show how he's used it in projects that are complex. Two things have happened. As we were doing this just a day or two before this webinar, PMI have just released a pulse report on complexity in projects, and one of the first, it's excellent reading, it's on their pulse report on their website, and it clearly says and reinforces what Warren has said, their research, that if we can reduce that complexity in an organisation and give them common processes and procedures, it's the starting block, and I really think that's justification. What the second part of my answer is, you'll find that a lot of people say that the maturity assessment does aggregate findings, and what I mean by that is you might have you might be interviewing a range of projects, and some are very well handled and some are quite mature and others aren't, so you end up with a median score. The question often comes out, people say, but Laurie, that's looking at the organisation. I have a very large, complex project within this organisation. How do I know if I'm under or over investing in those 7 perspectives? Now the answer is what APMG is heading towards, is the maturity index, where it's very similar to P3M3 approach. You do a similar amount of interviews, a few more questions, and it's fed into the database. I think what we've got is people are understanding and highlighting those 7 perspectives, and they're asking that question, gee, am I over or under investing? Because it's easy to continue to over-invest in governance, but you might not need to, and you might forget at the same time that you are under-investing in risk for a project of that size and that complexity. So I think that tool is really going to help people.
Okay, thanks. The next question comes from Tony. What's the next wave of interest?
I might have a crack at answering this one. I think the next wave is going to be in that how do I assess my individual project? And I feel people are wanting to take that on and ask that question. The next wave of interest will be in that area. I also can see from some of the analysis I've done of what's been on AusTender, organisations are saying we need assistance in actually having real capability improvement plans, not just pieces of shelfware, but we need to show demonstrated improvement. So the next wave of interest is turning some of these observations and findings into truly improving capability in organisations. So I think there are two, maybe a big wave, which is the complexity and how can we help analyse our complex large projects, and the second one is we're needing assistance to focus on these 2 or 3 key perspectives in our capability improvement plan.
Okay, thanks, Warren. And the final question comes from John. It's a 3-part question, and perhaps this is pointed towards you as a reviewer of P3M3, Laurie. When is the P3M3 refresh due to finish? Will it impact on the Australian market? And can people contact you about the refresh? So I think that's right up your alley, Laurie.
Yeah, it is, and I'm reminded I have signed a non-disclosure agreement with the Cabinet Office, but I hopefully I won't. This will go on record, and I won't be fined or imprisoned. But I can say that there is a refresh happening. There are 3 alpha reviewers, of which I'm one, and I can assure you, and I did check on it last night with one of the guys, that the emphasis is backward compatibility. Whenever you are changing a model or upgrading a model, you do recognise that people are using it to make investment decisions, and that has been recognised. Australia probably leads, I reckon, the world in uptaking some of these assessments. I can assure you that the refresh is going to be backward compatible. As for a timing, I really don't know. I believe it will probably maybe by the end of the year. Those sort of that really depends on a number of factors. But the key message for everyone is, yes, it is going to be backward compatible. Please, you have my email addresses at the end of the slide pack. Please contact me and I can pass on your thoughts and comments to the reviewing panel.
Okay, good on you, Laurie. Well, thanks. That's probably about all of the time we've got for questions. We're fast approaching the top of the hour. So, ladies and gentlemen, can I change the slide if it will follow my prompts? Here we go. Can I thank you for being a part of today's webinar, P3M3 Assessment Choices, Registered Consultant Led or Self-Assessment, which one is right for your organisation and when. And if you'd like more information on the maturity models, there's a URL on your screen. Neither Laurie nor Warren is yet to embrace Twitter, but if you'd like to follow me or APMG International, you can see our Twitter handles on the screen. Fortunately, we're all on LinkedIn. If we're not already connected, reach out to us and connect. LinkedIn is a tremendous business development and networking resource. I use LinkedIn to share all sorts of information that I hope you will find of benefit. Website addresses for each of our respective organisations are there on your screen. And if you'd like to email Laurie, Warren, or indeed me, you now have our email addresses. Also, if you'd like to suggest future topics for a webinar, feel free to email me. If you're not already subscribed to the APMG International blog, there's the link in the bottom left-hand corner. It's full of lots of interesting information that I'm sure you'll find of benefit. Well, once again, thank you for being a part of today's webinar. And a reminder for those of you that registered for the webinar that in the coming days you will receive an email containing a link to today's webinar recording. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of you all, I'd like to once again thank both Laurie, Kirk and Warren Jolly for being a part of today's webinar and sharing such a great load of informative information with us. And without further ado, I'd like to say thank you and goodbye.